You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Call. I've got Brad Hunt here beside me. Today's guest is Jeremiah Plyer from Wilde Arrow Archery Shop. This is episode 2 of 4. And on this episode, we talk about
third access and all that stuff on your site.
I had some trouble at the tack on a couple of downhills in general. It's mostly downhill. And we were uphill, too. We were all shooting a little low. And so we were like, Jeremiah, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because flat, man, we are amazing.
Yeah.
You start adding angles and downhill steeps. And those in-between angles, too, are a lot trickier than...
Correct, because not necessarily it might not be your site, but the technique, and you don't realize that you're creating a bad technique.
We totally cover this in the podcast. It's eye-opening. I have some homework to do to try to figure some things out with my own shooting. Anyway, it's a really good show. You'll enjoy it. Thank you for supporting us. If you want to win a $4,000 gear package right now, big hunt gear package, just shop at Initial Ascent. Go over there, and every $10 you spend at Initial Ascent gets you an entry to win. They got more than backpacks over there. You can get kit sacks. You can get sleeping pads.
Initial Ascent gear.
Yeah. Platypus, water bladders. They got other things over there. Bottle holders, pouches, all kinds of stuff. Go over there, check it out. Use the code GRITTY at Initial Ascent, and every $10 will get you entered to win. And the hunting season is almost here. Our hunts are our first hunt is in 2 weeks. Ryan is already in Alaska doing his thing. So the hunts are here almost. If you need some last minute gear, equipment, archery, whatever, go check out the Go Hunt Gear Shop. Use the code GRITTY over there, and you will save. And
you also build points for future purchases, too, through the Go Hunt Gear Shop. So every purchase you make, you get points for that. You add those points up, and then you maximize your dollars and get free stuff, too.
And that helps us out, too. If you're not a Go Hunt insider, consider that. It's well worth every penny.
Yes.
Can't recommend it enough. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. Don't forget that we have a coupon code with Mountain Ops as well. You get 20% off whenever you shop over at Mountain Ops right now using the code GRITTY. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy this one. And stay gritty. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call. I've got Brad Hunt here beside me, and we're back at the Wilde Arrow Archery Shop with Jeremiah Plyer. We're continuing our discussion. If you missed the last podcast, go back and check it out. We pretty much talked about pressure, shooting under pressure, controlled shots, command shooting, a few things like that. But I wanted to dive back into the Total Archery Challenge and my experience. For those who didn't see the film that we made, we filmed all 25 shots. All of our heroism and all of our failures are there for the world to see, shot by shot. And we kept a score going, and you can go and see it. Like I said on the other podcast, my goal, especially in these later, we're a few weeks away from archery season. Yeah. I like to go to 3D shoots and then just see if I can kill every target.
TAC is one of the best events to know. If you can't go and perform at TAC, there's no way you're going to transfer that to the field.
Right.
Adding the pressure plus the wind, the angles, the uphill, the downhill, the branches, the bushes. You have to shoot over humps. There's little challenges.
It's one of the most realistic 3D shoots you'll ever go to.
Yeah.
Especially for Western hunters, right? Like some of these guys that come from back east, they're like, this is what you guys hunt in?
Yeah.
And instead of taking the chairlift to the top of the mountain, we had to get up at 2 a.m. We had to hike up here and then try to kill it here and then hike back down.
Right. Well, that's so interesting as well, because when we were with our crew, the guys from the East Coast were breathing pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And I breathe heavy no matter what, but I'm not actually tired.
Yeah.
It was just another walk that day. No phase whatsoever. But you could feel other guys, were 10,000 feet.
Oh, yeah.
They're struggling. So very realistic.
For sure.
I told you about the shot where I tried to shoot through some branches. That's just what it is. I missed that one target. The other one was this downhill target.
Yeah.
And this is what I want to get into a little bit with you today. I want to hit those downhill targets. I did hit a lot of them, right? This one was a little bit longer distance than a lot of them. We're talking 72 yards and a little bit of crosswind, not much, angled downhill. And I shot what I felt was a perfect shot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, it felt great. Like all my other shots that are all in that that kill zone.
Yeah.
I shoot, and it's elevation's good, but it's a little bit right. And I'm like, man, that felt like such a good shot. Loaded another arrow. And I'm like, man, let me just see what's going on here. So I pull back, I shoot, do the exact same thing I just did. Everything felt perfect, did it, perfect release. I was like an inch from the other shot. They both grouped right next to each other.
Yeah.
That tells me that I'm doing something. Like my shot process is good. I repeated whatever I did, I repeated it the same way. But my impact point is not where it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things? Explain this to me. What's going on here?
Yeah. So with dealing with these angled shots now, your third axis of your sight this is where having a third axis on your sight is so critical.
Explain that. What's a third axis on your sight?
A third axis is when you have your scope. A lot of guys know what first and second is, which is like, I like to run my first axis parallel to the bow and then make sure my second axis intersects that at 90 degrees. And first axis is important, but there's a lot of sights that don't even have it. Like an HHA, great sight, but they don't have first axis, which is okay. As long as the second axis intersects it, that's basically telling you that when I'm on flat level ground, shooting at a target, that I'm holding everything vertical. So we want our arrows to line vertically, right? Mm-hmm. On a target. Mm-hmm. And so if you go from 20 to 80, you're not having to go, I'm dead on at 20, and then I get to 80 yards, now I'm hitting left, right? Mm-hmm. And then say you give your sight some clicks to the left and you're dead on at 80 and you walk back to 20, now you're off.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of factors with that. The set up the bow, center shot, but basically when you get your bow tuned, you set your first and second axis, I should be able to go from 20 back to 80 and not have any deviation left or right. Now, third axis has a lot to do with shooting up and downhill. Okay? Yeah. That's where this comes in. And that's the bubble's relationship to the bow on, it's probably hard to see this on film, but if I have my bow and my scope's here and I'm looking at my pins, like say this is the pins, it's the bubble's relationship to this plane. Mm-hmm. And third axis is
it like tilts the sight away from you or closer
to your body. There you go. That's the best. Yeah, to your body, right?
So because when I look at mine, it's a little bit tilted away.
Yeah.
Because you adjusted that third axis for me. And when I look at it, it looks kind of funny from certain sides. But why what is it that's helping with?
So third axis, when it gets set, like you can put it in a vise, get it close. But the two biggest factors for third axis is how do you hold the bow? Guys that have a little bit of induced torque into the bow system will directly correlate to their third axis on their bubble. And then also riser flex. A lot of guys don't realize that, a lot of these newer bows, newer risers, they're getting pretty stiff. They don't move as much, but some of these old bows, you'd be really blown away of when you draw of how much that riser actually is bending and twisting from static to full draw. And so you really always want to try to set third axis at full draw to the shooter's hand is the best starting point there. Okay. And so like say here at the shop, I put a new sight on, I check my first and second in the vise, get it where I want. Then what I'll do is I'm going to draw my bow and I have a rope that's hanging from the ceiling with a weight on it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to start nice and level at the wall. I don't do it with an arrow in there, so don't dry fire if you're doing it this way. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle up and I'm going to keep my pins perfectly on that rope. And then I'm going to look at my bubble and see if my bubble is now reading to the left or to the right. Okay. You can buy a tool from Hamsky that helps you set that. And I've used that Hamsky tool for a lot of years, but I have found that with the machining quality of some of these newer sights, that the pins are pretty in line. Like if I'm setting my third axis to the pins in my scope versus the Hamsky third axis level, I'm getting a very similar result. So for a guy, if you want to have one, great. I think they're $65, but you can probably do it at home using your pins.
With a plumb bob.
Yeah, exactly. And use your pins, and it's going to get you pretty close in the ballpark, okay?
Yeah.
Now, setting my third axis here in the shops that way usually gets me pretty dang good, but I always want to go out and verify it, okay? Yeah. And the reason I want to do that is when I get out on the mountain, and now I'm standing on uneven terrain. I'm going to put a target on a pretty steep downhill shot, and I'm going to draw my bow, and I want to start level for me, and then I'm going to angle down, and I'm reading my bubble in the scope at that point. And what I want to do is have my bubble centered, pinned to the target, and break a good shot. Now, if that's what you were describing, like on your downhill experience, if you're like, hey, I drew back, I angled down, my bubble is perfectly in the middle. the pin's on the target and I went through a perfect shot process and my arrows hit right, I'm going to make an adjustment to my third axis at that point.
Okay. Makes sense. And if a guy is listening and he hasn't adjusted for his third axis, that could explain why he's pretty far off, like at a tack event, but he's dialed in his backyard.
100%.
He can go to a shop, or he can look it up on YouTube, or he can figure it out. He can get a Hamskea tool, or he can use a plumb bob, whatever. He can get it fixed. Okay. Now, I've shot a lot of downhill shots this summer. I did pretty good at all the events where they're downhill. I did not shoot this way. I did not have this problem. So I don't think that that's my issue. I don't think it's third axis.
Okay.
What would be the next explanation? The other thing I told you too is I tend to shoot low, shooting uphill.
Yep.
And we talked about, like, for some reason, I'm shooting uphill. This is a 75-yard shot we did for this giveaway.
Yeah.
And Brad and I we shot low, both of us.
Yeah.
At first, and I even added a yard or two on the slider, and then I'm in it. But I know, like, when I'm level, I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
So there's two factors if you're on uphill shots, if you're missing low. Number one that I see guys do a lot is when they draw to shoot uphill, instead of starting level in what we call a T form and raising their upper body to stay square, I'll see guys take their bow arm and raise it up towards the target. And
so if you're watching on YouTube, here I am at that T square.
Yep.
I'm pulling, I'm holding, I got my shoulder blades engaged, all that kind of stuff. I'm like in it, how I would shoot. And you're saying what they do is they raise this bow arm up.
And not pivot at the hips.
And not pivot at the hips. The moment that this arm changes by 1 degree angle, if you're moving it up, you're going to miss low consistently on uphill shots.
Okay, when it's a extreme downhill, okay, or an extreme uphill, I do tilt at the hips.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've done that out of a tree stand for years. I knew, like, if I don't do that, I'm missing. Right.
Right.
However, and you brought this up earlier, this is why I want to do this podcast. Because this was not steep downhill. It was just downhill.
Yep.
Couple degrees.
Few degrees. That 75-yard target, 80 yards when we're back there, it's not steep uphill.
No.
It's not straight up like this. I don't do it at the hip, dude. I'm like coming to full draw. I'm like, it doesn't even matter. It's pretty much level.
Well, to your point though, because you know what it should feel like at full draw, right?
Yeah.
To a new shooter, what ends up happening is if they're drawing at the target, that's okay. But what you need to be able to do is still square your upper body to the target, right? And you'll see a lot of professional archers do this. Like, Cody, for example, we were talking about, Cody will draw at the target and then pivot and square his shoulders up. As long as you're getting square to full draw, whether you do my method where I draw level and try to come down, or draw the target and square up.
Because I think you're right. I think I came to full draw, and I think I just lowered my left hand. Yeah. The bow arm, I just lowered it, but kept this anchor point where it was.
Yeah, and if it's depending on how much you're lowering that wrist, that T form, it determines and typically it's opposite. If you're dropping your wrist towards the target on a downhill shot, you're typically going to be hitting high. You're going to blow everything out the top, and so as long as you get that body alignment proper. But it's usually not the steep shots, right? Because guys know, it's super steep.
That's what I'm saying is the steep stuff. I'm like, good. Yeah. I'm in there. It's the sort of
the in-betweeners.
Yeah, the in-betweeners. That's it's when they're like, they're if say you were to come to full draw and you got your pin set to 72 yards and you look and go, the target is slightly below my pin. The natural habit is for guys to want to drop that pin. They want to drop that pin down to the target instead of pivoting
1 degree at the hips.
Exactly. It's so much easier and comfortable to drop the arm versus pivot the hips when it's those in between type of angles.
Well, in my head, I'm thinking about this is you barely drop your arm.
Yeah.
It's like, your hand, your release hand is going to stay the same. You just totally changed the peep angle, the string angle on your nose, your face, everything. You might dip into it a little bit like this. You still hold your same anchor, but you've dipped into it to see through your peep correctly.
Right.
Instead of keeping everything square.
Yeah, I thought I heard Chris B say, like, if your peep and your sight housing are lined up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. As long as you can get everything squared, but a lot of times what you'll end up doing is dropping this hand down and then
bow arm.
Yeah, and then now you're repositioning your head position.
Creeping in.
Yeah, you're moving your head position to look back through the peep, right? Mm-hmm. And
I thought though, in theory, if it was lined up, then it's going to hit where, like a rifle, it's going to hit where.
Yeah,
it should hit.
You're moving your anchor point to get it lined up, which is okay. I mean, you're doing that on a slider sight anyway, right? Like if you have a slider and you're moving that slider down from 20 to 100, you're repositioning to that point to make sure that your halo around your scope is correct.
Well, and I want to get your opinion too, because like as we're talking about that right now, I always sight in my peep for between 50 and 60 yards where I'm like super comfortable.
Yes.
Because those closer shots, the margin of error is smaller.
100%.
So I can tuck in just a little bit.
Yeah.
Where when I get out those 60, 70, 80 yards, if my peep is sighted in at 20 yards, you're like, you're
climbing up you're climbing too
on a
far
slider.
to get into the peep.
On a slider with the slider.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I always sight in with like 60 yards my peep.
Yeah, and I recommend that for guys. Like, on my setup, like, if I'm running a 3-pin slider, say 30, 40, 50 on my pins, when I get into if I have my pin set 30, 40, 50, and I draw and get into my anchor, you will watch my nose dip into the string slightly with a little bit of pressure.
Yep.
And the reason, to your point, is I want my peep centered at the longer shots. That's where it's way more critical.
Correct.
And so, setting that peep sight to where, I see guys that will set it where they feel really comfortable at 20 yards are great. Right. But the moment they slide to 80 yards, they're like, I can't see through my peep.
Get up in the peep.
And then you climb up the peep or up the string so far, now you've lost your contact point to your face, right? So peep height is definitely a factor.
The other thing I was going to say is some eyes are different. My eyes are extremely bright light sensitive. Like I can see in the dark, but bright light is really hard for me to see with.
Yeah.
Like we'll be looking at these targets and they'll be like, the 12 ring is right here on that target in the bright sun. And I'm like, dude, I'm blind.
And I'm
blind.
totally opposite.
The brighter the light, the more blind I get. And so when you're sitting there and your peep sight and your sight housing are lining up, they grow and they shrink. Yes. For me, especially, I think more than others, as I've shot with other people, I've noticed my eyes struggle with that.
Yeah.
And so I think back to what Chris B said, lining up the sight and the peep, and as long as they're together, But like sometimes when the light is lower or it's shadowed,
you're going to have a gap.
I have a gap.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now that I have a gap, where do I put that in there? And so I think that's where when I'm shooting downhill and it's bright sunlight, the peep shrinks a little bit.
Yep.
But when it's downhill and it's low light, now I'm swimming in there. It's like, well, now that I don't have that T formation because I just dropped my bow arm a little bit, I can see how I'm just, because you're talking about 2 inches.
Yeah.
3 inches drop, 2 inches drop. It's not massive. I'm still in a kill zone at 65 yards, but it's not the 12. It's not the height I wanted, and it's consistently low. And so I'm like, dude, do I just add a yard when I'm going uphill, or do I fix my form?
Well, two points to that, okay?
Because I don't want to. I want to fix it. I don't want to. I don't want to
compensate with
a hack.
Yeah. So number one, like, when we're trying to get a peep sight set for a guy to get a good picture around his halo, like indoors like this, shop's not as bright. We've got black ceilings in here. I want a guy to actually see a little bit of daylight from his peep to his scope.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, because I know the moment he walks out the door and draws it out in natural sunlight, it's going to get really, really tight. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed this for me too. Like I hunt a lot of ground blinds. I was in Texas last June. I'm in this ground blind and this jackrabbit comes in. I'm like, I'm just going to draw on him, see what I drew back, and my peep looked like it was, there was so much room around it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is not even close. So I'd step out of the blind and draw my bow back, and my sight picture is now perfect. So when you're dealing with the lighting conditions that change, and what you could focus and practice on is make sure that the bottom edge of the scope is lined up with the bottom edge of the peep.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't care how much.
Dudley say that too.
Yeah. I don't care how much gap I have above the peep side at that point. Right. As long as I have the bottom to bottoms lined, it should help eliminate what you're talking about. It's like, well, where do I try to center it now if there's nothing to really base it off of, right?
Yeah. Well, where I really noticed that was when I started shooting the 8S option archery sight. So it's an oval.
The oval. Yeah.
And I put the oval peep, and I was like, the only way I can get that sight to line up is that sight is super close to the bow.
Yeah.
Where I didn't like that, for many reasons. So I extended it back out, went to a circular peep. And it's like, yes, I'm going to have gap up above, but I make it so the bottom and roughly the sides are like sitting in that peep, but I have all this gap above it because the side is an oval.
Yeah. Yep.
And it made a big difference when I did that.
Yeah, for me, lining my biggest weakness is lining up the peep with the sight housing and keeping it there throughout the shot.
Right.
And it doesn't matter 60 and 0 to 60. It kind of doesn't matter that much, especially 0 to 50.
Right.
I'm like in a real nice zone, but I start stepping out to 80, 86, 90 yards, and all of a sudden the peep not being exactly aligned starts to really rear its ugly head.
For sure. Yeah. Well, peep, getting the peep centered on the scope, very important.
I put the ham ski on there.
The Hamsky Peep, the Raptor.
Yeah. And I believe that helps with some left and right, as well as the shrinkage.
Their light baffling they have in there definitely doesn't allow the sight picture to change as drastic in lighting conditions, right? It does stay more consistent. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that their Peep's a little bit longer, that definitely helps with a really good, clean sight picture. And we run a lot of those. Guys really like them. The only factor with those is, for a guy that maybe doesn't have the best quality string and his Peep's constantly twisting, he's going to fight that a lot more, right? But for a guy that's running good quality strings, and we can keep that Peep really straight, you are going to get a better sight picture from there. You're not going to see as much light change from indoors to outdoors, or, heck, you could be out on a day hunting where it's super bright and sunny like this, and then a thunderstorm rolls in and you're in the dark timber. I mean, those lighting conditions change drastically, even out in the field hunting.
Yeah.
And so the more consistent you can make that, the better, for sure.
Tell everyone in the audience about how you were shooting lights out to what'd you say, 110, 120, fairly level course, but you sighted in and you were dropping that bow arm on every target in 10-yard increments. Explain that.
Yeah. So this was years ago, going out shooting my grandfather's. I could shoot 110 yards there. And I had dialed in a bow that I was shooting groups of 110 that even I was like, man, this is pretty good. Like I'm going to go pro. I'm taking pictures, like send it to the wife, like, hey, look how good this is, And so, and I'd sighted in my bow, and then I went to a 3D shoot, local club here, up in Logan, Cash Archers. They have a shoot every year up in, Hardware. And, I'll never forget this. There was a 45-yard shot uphill. It's a mountain goat target. And, they're a big size target. I'm like, oh, I've got this, 45 yards.
Tip shot.
Yeah. I draw back and shoot, and I hit this thing like way high in the hump. And I'm like, what the heck? So I'm looking at my bow. I draw another. I had 2 arrows touching. I chased that bow all day long. You want to talk about coming off the course just deflated. I'm going, how can I go from shooting a group to 110 and then I can't make a 45-yard shot?
And something just to reiterate, like basically if you went to your grandpa's place and you shot those targets, you would be drilling 12 rings the whole time.
All the way back.
But as soon as you went to that other course, you were going to be hosed.
Yeah. So what I found that I was doing is I was out and I was taking my target and I'm setting it on the ground, right? And I'm a pretty tall guy. So from where my shoulder height is to the ground is different. Well, I got lazy, just didn't realize what I was doing is when I would draw to the target, I was dropping my bow arm down. I was letting the pin drop down to the target because I felt really steady. I'd shoot dead on at 20, 30, 40. I built a sight tape and basically had sighted in my bow by dropping my arm to the target. And you got to think, depending on the distance from the target, like from 20, the angle might be steeper than when I get to 110, it's not as steep, right? I'd sight in my bow that way. Well, as soon as I go up on the mountain.
Not only did you sight in that way, but you practiced the form that way.
I was dropping my bow.
You weren't in the T.
Wasn't in the T form.
That's such a wild idea. You're coming back and then you're just dropping your front arm to put the pins where they need to be. And you do that again at 30, and you do that, from 50 all the way back down. And each time you're dropping, putting a sight mark hash there, and you're like, okay, these are my increments.
Yep.
You just built yourself a disaster.
I did. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so.
Unless you're shooting rabbits on your hunts.
I couldn't hit a rabbit on the hunt. I was shooting too bad.
Yeah.
So after I stepped back and I thought about it, and I went back out, and what I ended up doing is I built a stand. And put my target more up at shoulder height. And I really focused on that T form. I wasn't letting my front arm move up or down to the target. I was making sure my hips, if that angle was off slightly, I was forcing my hips to go back in. And the next time I went to a 3D shoot, smoked it. I mean, just shot
ask
lights
you this,
out.
Jeremiah, do you think that with the compensating rangefinders, it gives you the angle and drops? you should be hitting 0 degrees, right, as your sight all the way back to truly get your T formation all the way back from 25 to 100 yards.
Well,
right?
It's based off the height of the shooter, though, too, right? Like my shoulder height's different than yours, but that's
what I mean, though, raising your target 100%. To match that.
The closer you can get the target to sit to your natural pin's height based off of your height as a shooter, it's just going to help you get more accurate, consistent marks. Now, for most guys that come in here and they buy a bag target, and I watch guys that come in here I'm working with, and they'll even draw at a target. I have a target at shoulder height. They'll draw, and I'll watch them drop that hand. I go, "You shoot at a target on the ground, don't you?" They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I can tell." I instantly seen him draw back and knew what his problem was. And, I've seen guys do that. I've been shooting tack before and had a guy, he was me Saint to a T. He's like, we're walking to the first target, and he's like, "Man, I'm shooting groups out to 100. I'm going to smoke this course." I watch him draw back on the first target, and I go, he's going to miss. And sure enough, watch him shoot, break an arrow. And he walked off the mountain deflated just like I was, because I knew his problem because I went through it.
Well, how many guys have a 50, 40, 30, 20 yard setup, 20, 30, 40, 50 setup that's completely flat in their driveway or something? And they have practiced for 5 months, like perfectly on flat. And then they go and they shoot angled shots and the wheels fall off.
Yeah. So
and that's why, like at my place, I have downhill, uphill. I got 3D set around because they keep you honest.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're like right away, early in your target shooting, you're going, "Oh, I have a problem. I'm doing something wrong."
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of ask you too, and we talked,
or my equipment's not right, or.
I want to ask you. So, we've been doing all these 3D shoots and mountain shoots, different angles, side angles. You're standing sideways.
Yeah.
You talked about it a little bit. We've got the sighting in, keeping a T formation.
Right.
But then, as we talk about like the third axis a little bit, you're changing the torque too.
That's what I want to talk to you about next.
I'm glad you brought that back up, because that's a very important.
Because here I am again, I'm drawing, and maybe I did drop my left, my bow arm a little bit to dip the pins down, and I didn't. I hinged at the T brace instead of at the hip.
Yep.
Probably because it wasn't super steep,
right?
And so I didn't pay attention.
But it's probably not going to hurt you because you're talking such a minimal angle at that point. Like what I'm talking
is in between, though.
Yeah, but if you're saying, "Hey, like my height was perfect, right? Height was great. I don't want to change anything height," but you're hitting left and right. That tells me that it's more probably third axis related in the bow than like dropping your arm up or down. We're going to see vertical up and down misses, right? And but left and right issues, here's what I see happens a lot of times when a guy's trying to learn how to set his third axis. So we talked about hanging a rope and using all this. So, but here's what happens with a lot of guys' setups. It's the balance of their bow. I'm seeing a lot more guys that are running like side stabilizers, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what happens is let's say I got this back bar coming out because it balances the bow really well. But the moment I go to angle down to the target, that back bar has a completely different leverage.
Balance changes.
It's trying to twist the bow in your hand. And they say on a downhill shot, that if you're a right-handed shooter, you got a back bar that's coming out to the left, it's typically wanting to turn your front stabilizer to the right. The bow's trying to twist this axis. And it's going to be opposite with uphill. Let's say I go to shoot uphill.
Kick to the
now
left.
the side stabilizer is trying to pull the bow in this direction, right? So my front stabilizer now wants to point to the left.
Okay, let's get back to me. Okay. So I'm at the target.
Okay.
And I have the quivalizer on there.
Yep.
The option archery quivalizer, which I love. It's got like 5 arrows in the quiver. Okay. I come to full draw. I hinge down. Okay. The quivalizer is on the right-hand side of the bow. So I can just grab an arrow.
Yep. No, it's on the left. You're a right-handed shooter. You got it on the left.
Yeah. It's on the left.
So the arrows are coming back to the left side. Yep.
It's on the left side. Yep. And I shot to the right.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
So
you think it's the balance of that?
That's the first thing I would check. So when you angle down, the reason I want to bring up the stabilizer issue, right? The upside stabilizer. A lot of guys, when they go to angle up or down.
I don't have a back bar, basically. I just have that front. And dude, it does. So it's money on a flat. Like I shoot just a little bit better than with no quiver at all.
Yeah. So, but if you're coming down, you're trusting the bubble. Let's say the bubble's perfectly in the scope, pins there, you're shooting, the arrows hit to the right. Now, typically with a third axis issue, you should see a correlation on uphill. When you shoot uphill, a lot of times you'll see your arrows start to hit a little left, right?
Yep. They do.
Perfect. So that's telling me.
Yeah, I shoot a little bit to the right downhill, a little to the left uphill.
You need to fine tune your third axes. Okay. Then basically what you want to do is when you're coming down and you're trusting the bubble, the scope's telling you, hey, the bubble's in the middle, but the arrows aren't impacting correctly. I'm going to adjust my third axis to where when I do shoot anything downhill, that when my bubble is in the middle and the pin is on the target, I still want the arrow to hit directly behind the pin.
And again, when you're talking about third axis, we did it on a different podcast, but it's the face of the sight moving towards your body or away from your body.
Correct. Yep. And so again, bow hand torque, the stabilizer on the side of your bow, there's a lot of factors that can affect that third axis there. And so setting the third axis to that bow or how you like to hold it or your grip pressure. So I would double check my third axis first off, number one. Okay. And I want to get to the point where my bubble is reading in the middle, that when I got the pin on the target, as long as that arrow is hitting directly behind the pin, I can now trust my third axis. So when I'm out in the field hunting, what you did is you trusted your third axis, and it might be just a little bit off still, right? But then what happens is a lot of times you're on those angled shots, you go to angle downhill, I'll see guys that want to turn that wrist a little bit, right? They're starting to induce a little bit of torque into the bow based off those angles. Like they're not keeping their hand pressure as consistent as they were on flat level ground. And so
I don't know if I've done that or not.
Just because of the different way gravity pulls your bow as you get down an angle. How it's
I'd be curious if I took the quiver off, what my results might look like.
Yeah, and you could try that. Like say a guy's fighting his third axis. He's like, man, I can't get this thing. And take the quiver and take your bars off. Shoot just bow only and see if it changes your input into the bow system, right? Yeah. And so, but yeah, when I set my, third axis here, I'm through all the years, I can feel that bow stay perfectly square. But what I see a lot of guys do is, let's say you angle down and that bow is not balanced. The bow wants to twist a little bit. You're putting some induced torque into it because of where you're pushing, whether it's uphill or downhill. I want to make sure that that bow is staying perfectly square. And what I see a lot of guys do is they'll angle the bow down, and now the bow is twisted. Like if you're looking at it, like you're shooting the bow, like think of it as a knife.
Yep.
Now I've turned it. So I can see, instead of looking at the edge of the knife, now I'm seeing the side of the knife, right?
Yeah.
That right there is your third axis, right?
See, I had problems with that in the past when I had a low hold weight.
Yeah.
I don't really...
You don't feel like you fight it as much? Yeah. So, but here's what I see a lot of guys do with third axis. That guys, when you're double checking it and using these steps, if I'm looking at that knife straight away from me, I can see the knife's edge and I'm on flat level ground. The moment that I shoot up or downhill, that is staying perfectly square. Okay. But what I see a lot of guys do is that bow will twist. Now you're seeing the edge of the knife, right? The side. Well, instead of squaring the bow back to where that's back where it was,
center.
They're rotating the wrist left or right.
Yes. What they're doing is they're now twisting the top of the cam left or right.
Which
so now they're twisting their bow on two axes.
You didn't correct that butter knife.
Yes.
It's almost, it's weird. You have to almost see it, because if I got the bow here and I'm aiming downhill and I torque it, so the tip of the arrow is basically pointing toward me a little bit more. So it's torqued.
Yep.
And then I see the bubble's not quite right. So then I just tilt the top of the bow or something to get the bubble where I want. Now I'm really off.
Now you've twisted, that bow is twisted on two different axis points now, right? And so, that's
see, for me, this is why, let's talk about hold weight a little bit, because if I drew a bow back with low hold weight, get it back here. Cody was pushing on my string like 3 inches.
Yeah.
And my bow was over here, but my string was away from the bow.
Yeah.
Like way outside, especially on some of these high let off bows. Then he'd also push on the string and it would just go.
Yeah, it's like a rubber band. It just moves.
And I'm like, dude, when I do face pressure, my bow is here and my string is to the right of the riser. Like it's not in a straight line.
Yeah.
So I'm really I'm notorious for that kind of stuff. So as soon as I started doing a heavier, pretty high poundage and a lot of hold weight, I pull that back. I can't push it much if I wanted to. And the bow wants to go on me. So I'm keeping the square tight.
Yeah.
And I'm got that big hold weight and I just get in there and I'm holding it. And then I execute that shot. I feel like that high hold, all these things we're talking about.
Yeah.
I feel like the high hold weight, a little bit heavier poundage, what that has done is made me 1,000 times more accurate without me having to even pay attention to all these factors you're talking about. Because I still shoot pretty dang good. Like with my rig right now, but I'm not really paying. I just draw and I shoot.
Yeah.
I just draw and I shoot.
When you talk about hold weight, talking about the let off percentage, 80%, 85%, 90%. So when you have an 80% let off, you're going to be holding more weight on that bow. Say it's an 80-pound bow, you're going to be holding like 15, 16 pounds probably.
Yep.
Where if you're shooting a 70-pound bow and
at 90% let off.
Correct. You're going to be holding like 6 pounds, 7 pounds,
not very
8
much.
Pounds.
Yeah, a lot of the newer bows, honestly, in my opinion, has created what I call a soft shooter. And it drives me crazy because trying to teach a guy how to set up properly with body structure and upper body strength, these new bows aren't disciplining guys to learn that method.
Right.
And when I face pressure, to your point, we fight it all the time. We'll have a guy come pick up a brand new bow. We walk him in the back to paper tune it. I can grab it and shoot perfect bullet hole. I hand it to him and he's 3 inches knock left. And so I'll tell a guy, hey, don't anchor this time. I want you to draw back because your front hand looks good. Yep. Peep that string all the way off your face. Just pull the bow back and shoot it. He shoots a bullet hole. So that's telling me, one, he's putting proper input to the bow with his front hand. He's not torquing there. But if a guy can go from, anchoring to shooting 3 inches knock left to not anchoring and shoots a bullet hole, it just proved how much face pressure he has in that, right? And what happens with these newer bows with high let off, you might learn how to shoot that bow again in a controlled environment, coming to the range, right? But the moment you're out there in the field hunting and you're excited, you take a little bit of that face pressure into that string, and boy, it can come back and haunt you.
Yeah.
This is what I learned over the years was I would have a few bows where, okay, pay attention to the torque.
Yep.
Hold the bow just like this. When you get it back, make sure you're only barely touching your nose. Okay. And there's like 10 items on my checklist before I got to, okay, so let the pin float. Okay, now there's like all these little details. And if I did it right, I could duplicate a great shot every time. I'm like, dude, that just doesn't help in a hunting situation. No. I can barely put the pin on it and the pick a spot thing together. So I wanted a bow that was repeatable, forgiving, despite my lack of input. As soon as I held back more weight and a little bit heavier poundage, the hold weight was a little more. It sort of resolved a million problems. All of a sudden, I'm just hitting behind the pin. Yeah. Over and over
Your
again.
input into the bow system doesn't matter as much now, right? And so it's not going to be affected more by those little details. So, yeah, I tell guys, number one, go to higher hold weight. Train your body to do it. Like guys years ago, they'd watch them draw a bow and they'd relax and that cam would jump forward. And they're like, I don't like it. It's a jumpy cam. I'm like, you're setting up so soft on that bow. But to that others, with a higher hold weight, like for me, optimally a hunting bow, I like around 16 pounds of hold weight. So the reason for years I've shot a lot of 80-pound bows. One, I can pull it back. It's comfortable. But it helped me with some of these bows that don't give me the adjustment in order to get the hold weight up where I wanted. 80 pounds did that for me, right?
Correct.
And so a higher hold weight, I aim the bow so much better on target. Under pressure, in wind, I can aim better. And now I've put more tension on my string to where face pressure is less of a factor, right? And we want a perfect anchor. Like when I'm working with guys, I want that string to stop perfectly at the front of their face. Make sure that the arrow shaft's not lined on their jawline. Like I'm trying to do as many things for that guy to help eliminate that. But if he is out in the field and he's under pressure and he does push his face into that higher hold weight will hide that significantly better than a high let-off bow.
That is where I think I have an advantage over a lot of archers is that very thing. I don't think I'm like super talented. I think what I've done is it's hard. It's hard to pull that bow back. It's harder to hold it back.
Yeah.
I can get tired after a few rounds, a few arrows. It took some muscle building to get there. It took a lot of soreness to fight through over time. But now here I am at this point where that muscle's built up. At first I wasn't very accurate because after 5 arrows I was shaking and so sore. And I'm like, but now I'm deadly. And I would rather build up the muscle, the strength, the conditioning and stuff and shoot something that I can repeat over and over again than this other thing that you're talking about, like this constant little tweaking and stuff. And so I think when you're looking at my arrow flight and it's just like comes out of the bow, you see in that tack video, it's just like perfect, clean. There's no wobbles, You see that, I got my face in there. I got my lip on the string. I'm probably doing all sorts of stuff that's not ideal. Brad's beard, his beard's all tangled up in there. But it seems to not matter that much.
Yeah.
And when I go downhill, I don't, I know we're talking about dropping that left arm, but I'm like, dude, it's hard enough to hold my bow back that when there's not a lot of cheating I'm going to get away with because it's hard to hold.
Right. Yeah.
So I think all these things sort of just
keeps you honest.
For sure. Yep. So,
and I started with that bow for 2 months with the least let off you can get on it.
Yeah, it had 90% let off.
Yeah,
on that bow.
Adjustable.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so and it's got those S2 cams on that Mach 34 PSE, and it would come back. And then I would hold it and I'd be like in the shot, okay. And I feel like I'm pulling.
Right.
And the arrow would go off because I got it ripped out of my hand. Like I probably shot in the course of a month. I probably shot. It got away from me at least 20, 25 times. And shot. And this is after really working hard to like pay attention, pull on that wall, pull on that wall, pull on that wall, and it would still get me probably.
Yep. So you must have had it set at like 80% let off.
Yeah, or 75 or
right.
Which on 80 pounds now, you're whole weight's going up.
I told Cody to make it hard, and it was right on that edge, and so I came back in and I was like, okay, I've shot it for a couple of months like this.
Yeah, we at the house, we adjusted it to, I think I went in between. It's either 80 or 85%.
He made it too soft.
Yep.
So I went back and Brad adjusted it and made it harder again.
Yeah.
In between. Because, dude, that one was too aggressive.
Yeah.
It was like, I mean, it was there to rip my
But what happens a lot of times with guys, especially like older bows that doesn't have the let off, I'll see guys do that here. They get here and then they forget about holding the bow and start thinking. And every time, to your point, it rips. I hate this cam. It keeps ripping me forward. I'm like, you've got to train to stay strong into the bow. Don't start it up.
Right.
There's a difference of setting hard or soft up into a bow. And once you've trained yourself to set hard, keep that back muscle tight, man. And it takes some time to develop. It's not going to be quick.
No, it was slow, but I used the bow to force me to do it. To make me set up hard. And I have we all have our cues. Every time I've drawn my bow back, every single time I say, shoot it like you mean it in my head. Like, that means pull like deliberately, a little bit of anger, and I'm setting in that really 100%. Firm, shoot it like you mean it. Like this matters. And I'm also telling myself, don't just go through a rep. Every shot, shoot it like you mean it. Like that's the first thing I do every time I pull a bow back. Shoot it like you mean it, or don't shoot it at all.
Well, and I'll say this: you've noticed that as we worked together longer over time, and even Greg, like as I started talking to Greg before our tack shoot, I'm like, Greg, the 2023 Brad is a totally different shooter than the 2022. Because I like you're having fun, you're laughing or whatever, and I walk up to a shoot and like whatever.
Yeah.
And now it's like same thing. I get up to a shoot and I'm like, I'm going to compete with these guys.
Yeah. Brad would come up and he'd just be talking to everybody, telling jokes, laughing, and he'd be like, just half-assed aiming, grab the camera and film the next one. I'm like, you did not shoot that shot like you even cared where it landed.
Yeah.
But now that the insults are flying hard, the mockery is there, and I'm filming
the knocks are coming off my bow.
Now that, and that's what I want to have happen. I want more pressure, the better. The more stakes that are there, the better, because it's getting me closer and closer to the real thing. And if you don't embrace the discomfort, if you don't embrace the humiliation, and one of the things I want to do with Brad was just more humiliation, because the more times that I've been in the public eye quite a bit, and I've wet the bed. I came up, having my imperfections and flaws for the public to ridicule me, and there was plenty who did. Fine. But because of that, it helped me grow to where I am today. All my mistakes you saw, but you also saw me grow into something different. And at the end of the day, I'm there to get better and to win. And the only way I'm going to do that is if I go through levels of humiliation and failure. And the higher the stakes, the more I have eyeballs looking at me, the more of that's going on, or money's on the table, or any of that kind of, dude, that right there adds so much, forging of the iron in the fire there that gets you prepared for those moments that matter.
Yes.
And the tack went pretty well. Brad had some failures. So I want to talk a little bit about this with you. on the next episode where we talk a little bit about arrows. Okay. Brad had nocks flying everywhere. His fire nocks were.
I think we figured out why.
I think I know why too. We're going to talk about that with you. I want to talk to you about my arrow build because the reason I'm shooting what I'm shooting is at your recommendation, and now I've been doing it for quite a while. I want to talk about those builds. There are people out there who completely disagree with the design or the build, or feel like, that there's just better options. I want to get your take on that because when it comes to archery, man, everybody's got an opinion.
Oh, for sure.
You can tinker with everything.
Yeah.
So let's get into that on this next episode.
Okay.
But this was really good. I have some things to go back. I have some homework now. Shoot with the quiver on, with the quiver off. Check my third axis. Make sure I'm not dropping my own bow arm. Pull and get that T-square dialed and hard before I tilt. All these kinds of little things that I think.
So really quick on that.
Yeah.
Me and Cody were talking about this before the podcast. Most new guys, I recommend to start with that T-form and start to learn how to angle down. That's a great starting point to learn what your body's trying to do, right? But once you get more advanced, kind of like it's okay to draw at the target as long as you're getting everything squared back up, right? So, yeah,
that's
Cody,
Bodie Turner. Yeah. He was like a lot of because I didn't see him tilt.
Yep.
Up. He didn't draw here and then tilt up. Yep. He draws at the target.
Yeah, but he's getting his upper body re-squared how it should be, right? So, but what you don't want to do is have a guy lift his arm up to the target and then draw, and now his upper body, his T-form is way off. That's just a guy that draws at the target and then pulls his bow and just stays in that position is no different than me drawing my bow and lifting my arm up to the target, right? It's the same, it's the same thing. So, as long as you're re-squaring, whether you draw level and angle down or draw at the target and square up, Either way, you're getting back to the same position.
Okay. All right, folks. Join us for the next one. We're going to talk about these arrows. Thanks for tuning in. Check out Wilde Arrow Archery Shop down here in Centerville, Utah. If you're in the area, hit them up online.
Yeah. Hit us up. Send us email, calls. We get guys, after we do podcasts, like we get guys from across the country calling, like, explain that one more time.
I'm really like, I'll give you an attest to this, Jeremiah. Like, I've been to a lot of bow shops. I quit going to bow shops because I didn't like them. Started doing my own stuff. I'm back to the bow shop at Wilde Arrow.
Well, and it's there's
you guys are incredible.
A couple things going on when people are getting set up. One is I'm at a point of proficiency now with my shooting ability that I can sort of go, oh, this is my bow. This isn't me.
Right.
It's frustrating when you're newer at this, and I went through years of this where my groups are here, here, and here, but I couldn't tell you if it was my equipment or if it was my shooting ability. Yeah. And as I've slowly reduce the variables of failure that are induced by my technique, and I'm much more accurate. Now I can pretty quickly identify when it's a gear issue. But if you're new, it is so useful to come to a shop because a guy like you can take a guy's bow and hit those rings and go, no, it's you.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful to know.
For sure.
The other thing is for years where I thought I was pretty good at the bow being dialed thing, or I found a shop I thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
Only realizing that actually there was some tuning issues and so here I am thinking, man, you got to get better at shooting. You got to get better. The whole time I'm chasing my bow, chasing my tune because the whole time it was not me.
Yeah.
And then you get some mental stuff going on and the wheels fall off. So very important to engage the help of a quality shop. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's we have one of the best crews. I mean, I have 20 years experience myself behind the counter here, and we got awesome guys. But I've said this for years. There's a big difference from an archery shop to an archery pro shop.
Correct.
But to a new guy, he doesn't know the difference yet, right? It's an education process. So yeah, there's certain shops out there that I know, man, great guys. They know what they're doing. I'd send someone there and I know they're going to get set up the right way, but do your research, find the best quality shop, go in and get set up the right way, because there's nothing worse than going into an archery shop and thinking you're getting this same level of service and you're really not. Right. There's a big difference there.
Absolutely.
So.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Catch us on the next one. If you missed the earlier podcast, go check that one out. We talked about releases, pressure, shooting under pressure, all that. Yeah. Thanks again, and stay gritty.